what we gonna do to them. Like, I just don't like that, But that's just how Bruce is. He comes in and he says that, he keeps the same energy throughout the whole season. So, but we don't need to say like that. Let's just go out there and hoop.
The Boston Celtics have easily been the best defensive team in the NBA this year, and the result of this earned them a number 2 seed in the extremely competitive Eastern Conference. Man, that felt very weird to say. Typically, whenever you're the number 2 seed, you are rewarded with a fairly easy matchup in the first round, but unfortunately for the Boston Celtics, they aren't just getting any 7th seed to face off against, they're facing off against the Brooklyn Nets. So we as NBA fans get the pleasure of watching a matchup that, in my opinion, could have easily been an Eastern Conference Finals matchup in the first round. So before we get to the content, make sure you check us out on Discord in the description down below if you guys want to just come in, suggest video ideas, or just chat with me. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. I'm not a big fan of traditional banks. They charge $35 for overdraft fees. They charge you fees for having a checking and savings account, and they don't give you cash back on debit card purchases. On top of that, most banks don't really care if you make or lose money, which is why I partnered with Albert. Albert is free to sign up for and easy to use. Instead of just opening a traditional savings account and hoping you put money into it, Albert looks at your income and expenses to see what money you can save. The best part is they give 5 to 20% cash back on retailers like Walmart, Starbucks, and McDonald's. Probably the most important feature of Albert is Genius. Albert has a team of financial experts called Geniuses that will look at your situation and help you make a plan if you get stuck. And for a limited time, when you click my link in the description down below, open up an account and submit a qualifying direct deposit, you'll get $150 just like that. That's an easy $150 to make, and thank you, Albert, for today's sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? I think the Boston Celtics versus the Brooklyn Nets might be my favorite matchup of the first round, and it's very easy to see why. I feel like this could be a legacy-altering matchup for multiple players that are going to be involved in this series. Primarily, the matchup I'm looking at is Jayson Tatum versus Kevin Durant. We're going to get to that in just a second, because before we get to all of that, it's important to know where both of these teams are as they're coming into this matchup. The Boston Celtics have outscored their opponents by 12 points per game since 2022 began, and were able to win 24 of 27 games to lock up the number 2 seed in the ultra competitive Eastern Conference, which, by the way, the more I think about this, the more I realize how unlikely this outcome was for the Boston Celtics. Nothing against the Celtics, by the way. It's just if you go all the way back to the offseason, there was significant front office turnover. You had Brad Stevens deciding to go up to a front office role. A brand new head coach was brought in. You can make the argument that the team as a whole got weaker on paper, and ultimately they put it all together and had one of their most successful seasons since the Isaiah Thomas era. If you remember, during the beginning of this season, there were rumors that the Celtics would consider breaking up Jayson and Jalen, and they never did. And ultimately, that should be celebrated if you're a Boston Celtics fan. Meanwhile, the Brooklyn Nets have had one of the most interesting seasons in recent memory. 1 year after going all in and trading significant role players like Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen, alongside multiple future draft picks to bring in James Harden, the Brooklyn Nets would hit the reset button and trade James Harden for a package that involved Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond. The storyline of the Brooklyn Nets for the past year, well, I guess you could even say for the past 2 years, has been injuries. Whether it's Kyrie Irving not being allowed to play due to a mandate that really didn't make any sense, which we're going to count as an injury because that just kept him sidelined for half of the games that he should have been able to play in. Kevin Durant missing 20 games and the Brooklyn Nets going 3-17 during his absence. Prior to that, you had James Harden dealing with a hamstring injury, and right when it seemed like he was about to maybe turn a corner, you decided to trade him for a player that hasn't played at all this year whatsoever in Ben Simmons, who currently is dealing with a back injury. So injuries are going to be a significant part of this series. While the Boston Celtics are expected to go into this series without their starting center, Robert Williams, who's been an absolute monster on the defensive end for them, who, by the way, is hoping that he can make his way back from a meniscus tear a little earlier than anticipated, the Brooklyn Nets will have to go into this series without Joe Harris and Ben Simmons. Now, there has been a report that Ben Simmons is targeting Game 4 for his Brooklyn Nets debut, but let's be honest here, how much of an impact do you expect Ben Simmons to have? I mean, we're talking about an individual that hasn't played NBA basketball for 11 months. He's now on a brand new team coming off of an injury, and his first game is going to be in the midst of a playoff series versus the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. I don't really like his odds for being successful. I'm not trying to bag on the individual, it's just typically players returning from an injury might need some time to become acclimated to the rigors of a NBA basketball game. I mean, hell, if you're out for even a week or two, you might be a little rusty. And then when you couple that with the fact that Ben Simmons hasn't played a NBA game with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving as his brand new teammates, I don't know. There's definitely a cause for concern of how effective Ben Simmons could even be if he does return for Game 4. And hell, you don't even know where the Brooklyn Nets are going to be during Game 4. Are they going to be down 3-1? Are they going to be down 3-0? If they're down 3-0, do you bring Ben Simmons back anyways? What's the strategy here at this point? The Nets traded for Ben Simmons for a reason, and the reason made a lot of sense, by the way, because their biggest weakness was defense, and Ben Simmons is quite possibly the best defensive wing in the NBA. But it's unclear how effective he will be when/if he does return. I mean, in an ideal world, you stick him onto Jaylen Brown or Jayson Tatum and hope that he can slow them down just a little bit, because the only answer the Brooklyn Nets really do have for Jayson Tatum while Ben Simmons is out is Kevin Durant. And Lord knows how effective Kevin Durant could be on the defensive end when he is going to be tasked with carrying the Brooklyn Nets pretty much to a similar extent as he had to last year. He does have Kyrie Irving helping him this year, but you get my point. It's not an ideal situation for the Brooklyn Nets at all whatsoever, but I guess you could say that Ben Simmons is officially the biggest wild card of the series. He could also come back and dominate and prove me wrong. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But in terms of matchups, this is a basketball fan's wet dream. You have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, who are the most skilled dynamic duo in the NBA, with their only flaw being the fact that they don't have much of a supporting cast. And if Jayson Tatum catches fire against Kevin Durant, then the Boston Celtics should have no problem beating the Brooklyn Nets. Kevin Durant might be literally impossible to stop offensively, especially if he catches fire from beyond the arc. It could potentially be a very long night for the Boston Celtics if that does happen. And the same thing could be said about Kyrie Irving. Although the Boston Celtics do have a solid option for containing Kyrie Irving and Marcus Smart, at the end of the day, I believe the Boston Celtics are going to win this series. The reason being that, one, they have the number 1 ranked defense in the NBA for a reason, and 2, they have significant amounts of depth. I mean, when you look at the Brooklyn Nets, if Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant goes cold, then you could essentially rule them out for that game and you could chalk up a win for the Boston Celtics. But the Boston Celtics, they have so many options and so many role players that have proven that they had the ability to step up in particular situations, to the point where I can't really see them losing this series. I feel like this is a legacy defining series for Jayson Tatum, especially dueling against Kevin Durant. Yes, Kevin Durant has a weaker team than Jayson Tatum, but all Jayson Tatum needs to do is just match Kevin Durant's output. Now, I know that's easier said than done.
That's an understatement.
But if Kevin Durant scores 40 and Jayson Tatum scores 37, I'm sure the Boston Celtics role players can take care of the rest. The Brooklyn Nets don't have any good defensive matchups against the Boston Celtics at all, but I could see them winning if Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant put on historic performances and they get additional help from players like Seth Curry. Andre Drummond happens to drop 10 points and grabs a lot of boards, but will they be able to do that for 4 consecutive games? I don't feel super confident about that, but there are some wild cards in this series, and Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are more than capable of overcoming statistics and odds against them. So I could see the Brooklyn Nets winning as well. It's just, it seems more reasonable for the Boston Celtics to win. I have the Boston Celtics winning the series 4-1 against the Brooklyn Nets. Let me know in the comments section down below what you guys think about all this. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.